Welcome back, beautiful people, to my channel. My name is Brian. If you've never been here before, welcome. I am a high school teacher who is creating this series to address issues that I see in the education profession, and as well as offer some solutions to address those things. Why do we have a teacher shortage now, right? The first two videos of this series, if you haven't seen them already, addressed these three things above here. The first was the most popular, addressing the lack of pay, and then the second one addressed this kind of difference between what we as teachers know students need versus what we're told they need and what we're told that we have to give them, and how there's a big difference or big gap there. So if you are interested in any of those topics, or those three things, go check out my previous two videos. They are on my profile page and as well as in the link below. Today we'll be talking about, I think, the most complex of these issues, which is the funding issue. The lack of funding for schools across the country, especially in low-income areas, is a big issue that I want to address today. And my first two videos are a little bit longer. I anticipate this one being a little bit shorter, not because I think it's less important, but because it's a more complex issue, and I'm only going to skim the surface today. But let's jump in. So I got all this data and information not only from my personal experience of witnessing some of these things, but from this study that was conducted by the Economic Policy Institute. I will include the link to this study in the description as well, because it is quite lengthy. I'm not going to cover it all today, but I did want to touch on a few key points that I got from it. The first thing of those is our current system of funding our schools hurts students indirectly, right? That we're not, lack of funding doesn't, intentionally hurt them, but in the long run, it hurts them, especially those in low income areas that get less funding. So how are our schools funded? Our schools are primarily funded, as the study discovers, by state and local taxes or, funds. So the state governments, on average in America in 2018, provided almost half of funding to schools, whereas property taxes, was a little over a third, and then rest came from other localities. The federal government, on average, for the past decade, has only provided, 6 to 9% of the funding for schools in states, and that's alarming. So that means the reason that this is important is local property taxes, right? That is reliant on the value of the home you're in. Meaning that if you live in a really nice neighborhood, you pay a lot in your property taxes, you have a wealthy house, or you live in a wealthy area, your property taxes are more in terms of dollars that are then going to those schools. So the schools are going to be better funded than in low-income areas. And so students in low-income areas are going to have a school that is worse, or at least worsely funded, just because of where they grew up and where they live. And so because of that, you see a lot of inequities in who's teaching there, how they're being taught. The support systems and support staff is really what I'm going to address today, and the lack that you see in those professions. So we'll get to that a little bit later on. The second is the Great Recession. This is an interesting topic because people are like, you think of the Great Recession, you talk about like a big economic downturn where people are really struggling in all aspects of life. But how does it impact schools? We actually saw and I talked about this in the first video, the opposite effect that you would think, or the opposite response, I should say, than you would have thought. After the Great Recession ended, right, that we're starting to get out of the recession, we're starting to recover as a society, our federal government and our governments as a whole decided to fund schools less coming out of the Great Recession. That schools were not seen as a top priority. They were seen as a tertiary, forget in the background kind of scenes. And so we took money from public education and gave it to other areas we thought were more important. And the reason this is so devastating is schools over the next decade, until the mid to late 2010s, never recovered from this. That schools, this was not a quick recovery, like, okay, this is a temporary 1 to 2 years thing, or then we're going to get schools back up to where they were or maybe improve them. We did not get back to pre-Great Recession times for most schools until the 2016-2017 school year. And again, that's in the study if you want to see that they show you what the funding looks like on a year-to-year basis, so definitely check that out. That is a big issue because that's an entire decade of students that were worse off simply because we didn't prioritize their education. And the reason this is important is education fuels a lot more things than just education. Education is a really big backbone of the economy, which is really what that study talks about. Is that education is a solution to issues, right? And it's a proactive step to prevent issues from even popping up, like unemployment spending or criminal spending, right? That you're more likely to commit a crime or be incarcerated if you've never graduated high school. It's kind of seen as a stabilizer in society. And so if we fund that less, students are hurt more, and then these other problems grow. So we need to fund students or fund schools more to prevent other long, in-depth issues. And we'll talk a lot about those when it comes to the solutions series that I'll get to after this. That'll delve into like what the proper response should be and what the positive effects of funding schools are. Underfunding of schools, it directly leads to this one. I think this is the most things that teachers directly feel personally, is that, for instance, in my personal experience, I have mentioned before that my school has about 3,500 students. When it comes to our ENL program, which is a program for English language learners, ENL stands for English as a New Language. But these are students whose first language is not English, and they're coming, usually from another country, but maybe they've grown up here for a couple years, but they are struggling with their English, whatever reason, it might be. English is not their major first language, so they need additional support for that. We have 3 ENL teachers for 3,500 students. Now, not all of them are ENL students. I think our ENL population is about 500 to 600 students, but let's say it's 600 students, right? That is 200 students per ENL teacher. I have only 160 students, and I am a general ed teacher. ENL teachers have a much more difficult job. They have a much more personal job, or what should be a much more personal job, to work with a student one-on-one and hands-on and really help them through the process. And they are struggling, right? And as a result of that, we as general ed teachers are expected to take on a lot of these responsibilities because they can't possibly manage those things realistically. And so in order to help them out and to alleviate some of their burden, we are then saddled with more, right? So I have ENL students in my class that fail every semester. And it's not because I don't care about them. It's not because I don't try. It's because we don't have the resources and support to help them out, right? I am not trained to teach someone whose first language is Punjabi, right? But I have dozens of students that are like that. I don't have the skills nor the resources nor the support to properly educate that person or that student and help them succeed, right? I can get them over the finish line, or I can drag them across the finish line, but they're not actually learning and getting a lot from my class. And a big reason for this, and a major reason for this, is we don't get money. We don't get money to buy, to afford salaries for ENL teachers, or to implement programs, or to have a specific ENL program at our school. They have one class a day that's for ENL. Every other 5 or 6 other classes that they have are gen ed classes where they're expected and taught only in English. They don't have I don't have an AI in my classroom, an assistant that helps me with those students. I don't even have them for special ed students. And so those students are really hurt by that. And this leads to what is the purple segment here, which I think is the most devastating for teachers, is I can be burdened with a lot. I can take on a lot. I can shoulder a lot. But when I start to feel like I fail, which I do constantly in my job, I think that teaching is a profession of failure. And you just kind of have to live with that, is that you're not going to be able to teach every student all the time perfectly, right? I can't adapt all the time to all my special ed students or my ENL students that I have with general ed students in my class, right? I have students that are, getting 100% on everything, not missing a point, and they could be on their phones the entire time, to students who can barely get like a 25%, right? All in one class. And I cannot possibly teach one way that's going to teach them the best, right? Every single one of them. I can do my best to teach the majority of them to the best of my capabilities, right? But to hit all of those 25 to 30 students per class period is impossible. And so this is where I feel like, in talking to other teachers and also just within myself, is the most emotionally draining, mentally draining part of this job, is that every day I fail. Every day I go home and I think of that student or students that I could have done better, or that just especially on test days, when you see those scores that they get, right, and you have to input them into the grade book, it's a gut punch to see that and know that I could have done better, right? I could have helped them out more, or like what if scenarios. when in reality, like we put all this blame on ourselves and we're really harsh on ourselves. And I'm a victim of this as well. But the blame should not be on teachers. It shouldn't be on gen ed teachers, shouldn't be on E&L teachers. It shouldn't be even on administration to some extent. It's the fact that our government has not prioritized education to a real extent. It's a feeling that we as teachers are forced to feel guilty for something that is inherently not our fault. We should have more resources. We should have more E&L teachers. We should have an E&L section that we can just block off in our schools, especially for E&L students that literally don't speak a word of English. I have 2 students this semester that, in order to speak to me, have to Google Translate that to me. They have no idea how to communicate with me because they've never learned it, right? And they're now expected to sit in a 30-minute lecture on the Great Recession or Great Depression and understand everything I'm saying when I'm using pretty large English words. It's not fair to them. It's not fair to teachers. And it's something that I think we just undervalue, is that we don't really care. We see that they get an F in the grade book, so they must be stupid. Some of my E&L students are brighter than some of my, English as a first language students. But they get worse grades because they're being taught in a language they don't understand. They don't get any support to understand the language. And they have teachers that either don't care, don't have the resources to support them, or are overwhelmed. And this is what leads to a lot of teachers quitting, is they can't emotionally handle this, right? That we've joined this profession in hopes to help people, right? And to educate them and to be a resource for them, to be a rock for them, to advance them to the next stage of their life. And when we feel like we are stopping that, when we're inhibiting that, when we're failing them from achieving whatever their goals or potential are, it's a really a big doozy for us. So to understand why some people are quitting, why some teachers are quitting, why there is a teacher shortage, is this feeling of failure. And it's not just for E&L students or special ed students, it's for all students, right? I have students who are proficient in English who fail my class because they are addicted to their phones, or they have, they work 40 plus hours a week, so they're just tired. They take naps in my class because they physically can't help it, or they have parents who put pressure on them to focus on things outside of school. And so they don't prioritize it. It's devastating. And so the emotional impact is something I think is really undervalued, in that teaching is part teaching, but it's very an emotionally and mentally draining process. I come home almost every day and lay on the couch for 30 minutes without moving, because I'm just like, I need time to just unwind and decompress. So underfunding of schools is a big issue, and we'll talk about the solution to that in the next series. Again, if you have any other thoughts, this is the kind of wrap up to my problem series. Please leave them in the comments. I would love to hear from other educators or people outside the profession that have questions about this, or other thoughts and things that you see that you think are contributing to the teacher shortage here in America. The next series, which I hope you are excited for, because I think it's more fun and more optimistic than this series, are the solutions that you see here. And these are definitely not the end all be all, but I'll talk about my thoughts on each of these here. Again, like and subscribe. I would love to keep growing this community. I've already been kind of positively surprised about the growth so far, and I continue to look forward to developing that with you guys. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitch as well. Those are in my description. I'll include those links there as well. And Mojo Corn on Twitch and Mojo Corny on Instagram. But again, I'll include those links. Thank you guys. I hope this was informative, and I can't wait to hear back from you.